Hello, I am Makeda of the Boston Badoofs, and I am the host of the SCL, which is the SoCal Championship Draft League. And this video is going to explain to you uh, how to use Gmaxes as well as analyze each one individually so you can kind of have an idea of what's good and what's not, especially if you're new and you don't know exactly how to play Pokemon. And I'll also show you how to Gmax because if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be a little confusing. So, first of all, you should know that when you Gmax, your Pokemon that you have out is going to double their HP. So, if your Charizard, for example, has 100 maximum HP, it's going to have more than that, but just for the example, 100 maximum HP. When you Gigantamax, it is going to become 200 maximum HP. If you are damaged, let's say you're down to 50 HP, that 50 is going to become 100 too. So obviously, it is a lot more essential to keep your Pokemon healthy before you Gigantamax because you're going to get the much less of a benefit from the Gigantamaxing if you're damaged. So you're going to want to do that at full health most of the time, depending on how bulky your Pokemon is. So let me show you right now by showing you a battle I have set up. I'm going to lead with my Machamp because on this team that is the Gigantamax, while the other one's the Snorlax. So you can see they send the Pokemon out. Once they're out, you can see this little button right here. It says Dynamax. Uh, the only Pokemon you should be checking this button with is the Pokemon you've specifically drafted for your Gigantamax. So only something from this category right here is allowed to use that button. If your S tier, A tier, B tier wants to Dynamax, they cannot do so because then you're specifically drafting your Gigantamax to use this mechanic. So you can see right now I'm just going to select Max Chi Strike, Dynamax, whatever, and you see they transform into this bigger version of themselves. And each one has a special effect. So you can see I didn't kill this time, but I also set up my Gmax Chi Strike, which is when you use this Gmax move, which is exclusive to Machamp, it raises the critical hit ratio of the Pokemon by 1. So, and also I burned myself with Guts. So this, even though it only did 49%, it should kill this time. Yep. So see how it killed it? So another thing to note is Gmax only lasts 3 turns. So I'm going to use it again right here, just to see. Oh, it's faster? Whoops. Just to show you how after 3 turns, it'll convert you back to your original Pokemon, and now you are unable to Dynamax anymore. See, the button is gone. So you want to utilize those 3 turns to the best of your ability, because when your Pokemon is Gigantamaxed, it is extremely powerful. You get increased moves. You can see that all those moves turned into different moves. Close Combat became G-Max, Chi Strike, Bullet Punch became uh, uh, Steel Surge or something, and they all have different effects based on what type their move is. So let me go over the Pokemon and their specific moves now because it's important to know which ones you think are viable to draft and not, because there are a few out there that are pretty useless and some that are just decent. So let me go over that. I'm just going to forfeit the match because we don't need it anymore. So here's the list of them, starting with Alchemy. So Alchemy is probably one of the less useful ones. I would say the only thing that Alchemy has going for it is that it is a fairy type, and fairy type is arguably the best type in the game. Uh, it's immune to Dragon, which was previously the strongest, most important type to use, or like not important, but it was the best type to use offensively. Then Fairy came out and it is immune to Dragon, and its only 2 weaknesses, Fairy and or Poison and Steel, are both the more defensive types in the game. So there's not very many offensive users of that type, which means it's a very strong type defensively as well. So Gmax Finale, which is its special move, it is a fairy attack, and it heals their HP of themselves and their allies. So this move is not great. there's an item called Leftovers. When you equip it, it heals like 1/16 of your max health every turn, and this is essentially the exact same thing, except it's on an attack, and you only get to use it for 3 turns. So very underwhelming. Um, it would probably be more useful in doubles, but we're using singles teams, so honestly, it's not great. But he's got a mediocre attacks HP stat, which means when it's doubled, it's not going to give you very much, but it is a fairy, and it hits pretty hard. 110 special attack, and very bulky in special defense. So it can be useful. I would recommend something else if you could, but like I said, fairy is one of the best types in the game, and with 14 people in this draft season, it is going to be very hard to get a strong one. So it wouldn't be bad. I'm not saying it's bad at all, but it's definitely underwhelming in comparison to some of the other choices. So let's go to the next one. Appleton. So Appleton is also underwhelming. It's very cool because it heals the status. Its special move heals the status of all of your allies. So if someone on their team decided to toxic spam you or paralyze spam you, which are moves or status effects that modify how your Pokemon is used. So let's say your Pokemon gets paralyzed, their speed is halved, and they have a 25% chance to not even attack on their next turn. So this Gmax move is quite useful because it clears all of that um, without having to worry about it. But I think there's a move called aromatherapy that does the exact same thing, and you don't have to rely on being in Gmax form to use it. So if you want a cleric to heal status, I wouldn't rely on Appleton to do so. However, it is a dragon. It's Grass Dragon, which is a very interesting type. And he has base 110 HP, which means at maximum, he'll be having a lot of HP. So 217 at level 50, doubled. He'll have 434, which means he's going to be really hard to kill. He is solid. He is a dragon. There's a lot of rare dragons, and he's also adorable. And he gets good, interesting berry abilities, which means when you're in Gigantamax form and your HP goes low, it could double the effect of the berries, which means they'll heal twice as much. Plus, they're in Gigantamax form, so it's even more beneficial to do so. Or it'll eat its berries early. And honestly, I think Thick Fat's probably the way to go because it has a 4 times weakness to ice, which means that it'll probably die in Gigantamax form to an ice move even with its HP is doubled. So, not the best Gmax. Very, very slow, very mitigating speed stat, but it should be decent if you're using it properly. It's definitely one of the lower tier as well, though, with Alchemy. Next up is Blastoise, and this is a brand new Pokemon this generation. Um, Obviously not Blastoise itself, but the Gmax Blastoise was just released with the DLC, and it is very scary. And let me tell you why. So Blastoise is in itself not all too powerful. It requires a lot of setup to use properly in terms of Shell Smash, but Gmax Cannonade is super strong. So Gmax Cannonade every turn. For 4 turns after this attack is used, your opponent is going to be taking extra damage at the end of the turn. I believe it's 1/8 or 1/16 of their maximum HP every turn, unless they are a water type, which is very solid. Um, and after a Shell Smash, this Pokemon goes in. So I have to warn you ahead of time, before you decide to draft Blastoise, that in this season, Shell Smash on Gigantamax Blastoise is banned. And that is because it would be too overpowered, in my opinion. If you look at Shell Smash, so if you'd rather draft regular Blastoise, you are welcome to and use Shell Smash. Where is it at? Am I blind? Shell Smash. So what this attack does is it lowers the defense and special defense by 2, but then it raises the attack, special attack, and speed stats by 2. So you get extremely high stat boosts in exchange for your lack of defense. So we decided to ban that on Gigantamax Blastoise because it would be very, very strong. Once you get a Shell Smash off for free, on a Switch or something, you just Gmax and you kill everything. So I feel like that takes away kind of the skill factor of the game. Like you just press the button and then you win. So we decided to take that off on Gmax Blastoise. You're welcome to run it on regular Blastoise, who doesn't have double its HP. So if it kept Shell Smash, I would say Blastoise is probably 100% one of the best Gmaxes to pick up. However, because we stopped that from happening this season, um, it's still very good. Last season, Gmax Charizard was our MVP kill leader, and he had the exact same move as Gmax Cannonade, but for fire types. So that can show you how the potential of this Pokemon is. One thing it is lacking though is I mean, I guess it's not lacking coverage. It gets Airstream. This is one of the reasons why Charizard is so great, because it gets max Airstream as well as its Gmax Fire. Um, but it's also a flying type itself, so it gets the stab bonus, the same type attack bonus as a flying type, which Blastoise does not get. So it might not even want to run Airstream. So Blastoise is going to be very solid. I would recommend picking it up if you really like Blastoise. I think its design is great, but do note that Shell Smash is banned, and you can't rely on that. So that's a little unfortunate. Next up is Butterfree. Butterfree's move is definitely interesting. It sets a random status condition to your opponent, which is poison, paralyze, or sleep. So that's underwhelming. One, because Butterfree as a Pokemon itself sucks. It has no stat over 100. Base 60 HP is not great, especially for a Gmax. But Poison is the worst status in the game, because every turn it does 6% of your health and has no other mitigating factor. Paralyze is good, and Sleep is good, but you have a 33% chance to get the one status that you want them at. Unless, let's say, it's an electric type, which electric types cannot be paralyzed, then you have a 50% chance, and even then, you don't want it to be poisoned. You'd rather use a different move on it. So, Butterfree is not great. It can be useful. It'll still survive hits, because Gmax doubling HP is not something to laugh about, but it is not something I would pick right off the bat. Next up is Centiskorch. It's a pretty good Pokemon as well. It is a bug fire type, which is very unique. There's maybe 2 Pokemon that utilize this typing. And it got buffed this generation because of the item Heavy Duty Boots, which means it doesn't take as much damage from Stealth Rocks. Um, and its move is quite interesting. So it is basically what Charizard's move is, but it traps you in. So it traps opponents in flames for 4 to 5 turns, which means that when a Pokemon is hit by this Gmax Inferno, they cannot switch out. So that could be very useful. But by the time you trap something in, unless it's a Pokemon that can tank all your hits, it's pretty much going to die. So there's no really need to uh, trap it at this point, as well as there's no way for you to take advantage of them being trapped and set up on them until after your Gmax fades. So um, unless you use it on your 3rd turn of Gigantamax and then start setting up coils or something, I don't really see Gmax Inferno being that useful in comparison to Charizard, who just has a better type combination and speed stat. So uh, I can't really justify picking up this Pokemon, although he does have 100 base HP, which is really solid. Doubling that puts it at 414, and really high attack stats, good, as well as pretty good coverage. However, uh, it still dies to a rock attack, like a rock throw, because Firebug is 4 times weak again. So it has a lot of weaknesses, like flying, water, rock, that are very common offensive typings that you're probably going to have to work your team around. So that's a reason to not pick it up, but it is solid. It did decently well last season, and it wouldn't be a bad pickup at all, especially with 100 base HP. Next up is Charizard. So this is our kill leader. Gmax Wildfire is exactly the same as Gmax Cannonade that Blastoise has. It deals damage to the opponent for 4 turns if they're not a fire type. Why this is so good is because With 109 base special attack stack, Charizard's already really strong. It has base 100 speed, which means he's not going to suffer from being outsped by a lot of things. I mean, there is things that'll outspeed it, absolutely, but it's not going to worry about that, especially if you can get a max airstream off. Because Charizard is a fire flying type, it gets the same type attack bonus from using flying attacks, so it doesn't hate using airstream, raising its speed stat by 1, which is max airstream's special effect when you're Gmaxed, and then just spamming wildfire. Even if they send out a rock type or something to tank your hits, you get max quake, which is ground, to deal with them. You get max overgrowth to deal with water types. You get max quake also deals with electric types. You get all kinds of coverage. It's just an all-around solid Pokemon. It's very frail, only base 78 HP in defense, but I can't really talk bad about this Pokemon because last season it got so many kills. It was the best Pokemon on LA Lucario's team, and it did work. So it's a super solid pick. 100 base speed, decent HP stat on this amazing effect of a move is nothing to scoff at. So definitely a good pickup. Next up is Cinderace. Now, Cinderace would be an absolute monster if you were able to use his ability. But again, like Blastoise, we have banned the ability Libero, which is what makes Cinderace good, on the Gmax form. And that's because every time a Pokemon with Libero uses a move of a different type than its normal, so any non-fire move, it'll turn to that type. And even if it's using a fire attack, when it's already changed types, it'll change back to fire type. So it still works. I don't know why I phrased it like that. But every time it uses a move, it changes to that type for the move, which means that it gains stab for every move that it uses. So unfortunately, on the Gmax form, that is banned. However, even without it being a static fire type, this Pokemon is going to be super solid. It's base 119 speed, which is insane. Base 116 attack, which is insane. Already both stats better than Charizard. It also has Airstream, which raises its speed, so it's probably impossible to outspeed. Doesn't get stab on it in Gmax form, though. And Gmax Fireball can be used on a target regardless of its abilities. So anything coming out to tank this Pokemon, like a Colossal with Flash Fire or a Centiskorch if they have Flash Fire, which normally absorbs fire attacks, doesn't absorb them. They still take damage no matter what. So it's less good in the fact that at the end of each turn, their opponent doesn't take damage like Charizard's, but it's very good because you cannot block the damage of this ability with another ability. So it's going to be super strong. Even without Libero, I think that he's going to be a giant threat. Just look at the sheer speed of him and the attack stat are just insane. And on most Gmax Pokemon, you're going to want to put HP investment, and that's very well possible for Cinderace because they're already so fast, so they could be extra bulky. Like on Charizard, typically you're going to run speed and special attack because you don't get much bulk from it anyway because how low its defenses are. But Cinderace, depending on how fast your opponent's team is, you could probably invest very little in speed and still outspeed everything. So Cinderace is going to be very powerful. Definitely a top pick, even without Libero. Again, Libero is banned on Gmax Cinderace. Please don't use it. It's going to be too strong, and we will forfeit that match for you if you use it. Although I'm not expecting to have any problems. It's a super good Pokemon, though, so definitely can't knock picking this Pokemon up. Colossal is a rock fire, super solid. Weighs 110 HP, so it's tied with Appleton for the highest HP stat out of the Gmaxes so far. 30 speed, pretty trash, but it's very defensive, and it gets a lot of good defensive moves. So Gmax Volcalith is kind of like Charizard's, in which it deals damage for 4 turns, but it's a rock attack, so it's less useful. It's gonna kill their Charizard and tank its hits, but rock isn't the best defensive typing, or even defensive typing, because even though he has 120 defense, he's 4 times weak to ground, 4 times weak to water. He's weak to all kinds of things, fighting, uh, rock, even again. So it's a good Pokemon. It's tanky, but it has a lot of weaknesses that can be exploited pretty easily. So I can't really see a reason, especially with base 30 speed, to pick this over something like Charizard or even Centiskorch. But it does get some cool abilities. So if something hits it with a physical attack, you can burn it, which halves the attack of the burnt Pokemon, which is pretty nice. That's useful, but it's very unreliable. It could probably run Steam Engine because it's a Gmax and can live a water attack, because it increases its speed by 6 stages, which means its base 30 speed goes up by, I believe, 3 times. So it'll be 3 times 73 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But it becomes relatively fast at +6, even with a base 30 speed stat. But at +6, you can't get your speed any higher. So keep that in mind. If you're planning to use Steam Engine, it is not reliable. You can't guaranteed be hit by a water attack, especially since it's also 4 times weak to ground. So if something gets both ground and water, they're probably going to opt for the ground just in case. But it is solid. Base 110 HP is nothing to laugh at. It's only got 80 attack and special attack, but it gets good bulk and good coverage options, so it could be very powerful. Next up is Caparaja. This was used by Adam last season, Jacksonville Jolteons, and he quite liked it because it has a very unique ability. So Gmax Steel Surge um, basically sets up a Steel Stealth Rocks. So I mentioned Stealth Rocks earlier, but I didn't tell you what it did. What Stealth Rocks is it is a field hazard. That's when your Pokemon switches into it, it takes damage depending on what their weakness is to rock. So if they're Charizard, they will take 50% of their health because they're weak to rock with fire and flying. If they're Caparaja, which is a steel type, they'll take like 6% because they resist rock. So there's a difference with each Pokemon sending in. What Steel Surge does is it sets up a steel type Stealth Rock. So any fairy type, rock type, anything weak to steel that switches in on this is going to take that 25% depending on their weaknesses. So Togekiss takes 25%. Um, what's something that's 4 times weak to steel? Rock. Is there a rock fairy? I mean, there's a rock fairy, but it's not in the game, so I can't really justify that. It's not as powerful as Stealth Rocks is because Stealth Rocks deals with a lot because fire is such a great type. Um, but yeah, so that's that. It also has base 122 HP, which is crazy. 122 base HP, which means he gets over 458 HP with a base 130 attack stat, even though his speed is way worse. So it would be good in comparison to Colossal, but with that Steel Surge, like I can't knock this Pokemon, but I prefer really fast Pokemon because speed is just so essential. But this is a Pokemon you won't regret investing in HP on because there's pretty much nothing in the game that's going to kill it in one hit. Next up is Corviknight. This is what I personally chose last season. His stats look underwhelming, but base 98 HP is nothing to laugh at, and 105 defense is quite solid. So the reason you would pick this up is Gmax Wind Rage. So I just mentioned Stealth Rocks last time. But what I'm going to tell you now is Defog, which is a way to remove Stealth Rocks. So Gmax Wind Rage basically functions as Defog, but it does damage as well. So it removes the effects like Light Screen and Reflect, which have your moves damage. It removes Stealth Rocks, Spikes, Toxic Spikes, Sticky Webs, which are all hazards. It even removes Steel Spikes that Caparaja might set up. So it removes those from the battlefield. So if you're really worried about hazards because your team is weak to them, Corviknight, one, it's flying type, so it doesn't take damage from regular hazards, so just Stealth Rocks affects it. Whereas Sticky Webs, which when you switch something into it, unless it's flying or levitating, your speed is going to drop 1 stage. that is a very unfortunate hazard to go on, and then you can just send Corviknight out, not be slowed down, have a high HP stat, and use Defog or Gmax Wind Rage. It gets both, and for that reason, even though I picked it last season, I would probably suggest picking regular Corviknight instead of Gmax Corviknight, because unfortunately it doesn't get very much coverage. It gets Steel, Flying, and like Fighting and Dark, and Starfall for Fairy, but outside of Gmax form, its moves in those categories aren't too great. Just the Steel, Flying, Fighting are really useful. So you're going to be basically using the same set every week because there's not much you can do elsewise. So Corviknight's not the best. It unfortunately underperformed for me, but it is still super solid. Almost never dies in one hit. Even to a fire attack or electric attack, it will not deal with it really quickly. So it's still solid. And its typing is great because it's really hard to get a good steel type. So that's Corviknight. Let's move on to Dreadnought. So Dreadnought is really interesting because, like Capraja, its Gmax move sets up Stealth Rocks. However, it is a water attack, which means it's a very strong offensive Pokemon with 115 HP or 115 attack that sets up Stealth Rocks when it attacks you, which is terrifying. Does it get does it get Shell Smash? Because we banned it on Blastoise because Blastoise is significantly faster, and it doesn't even get Shell Smash even though it's a turtle, whatever. I guess it's not significantly faster. It's 4 speed, but if this thing got Shell Smash, it would be a monster. So, it has base 90 HP, which is pretty great for a Gmax. 115 attack. It hits you really hard. Sets up Stealth Rocks, which is always good because then you don't have to waste a slot on another Pokemon for Stealth Rocks, and it does damage. So that's really solid. It's 4 times weak to Grass, which is honestly not that popular of an offensive type, so you probably will be safe most of the time. It's weak to Fighting and some other things, Electric, but for the most part, it's not going to be that bad of a choice, especially if you have a Rain team. It gets Swift Swim, which means you'll double its speed if you also have Rain out. Unfortunately, it can't set up its own Rain because its water attack is replaced by Stone Surge, because Max Geyser is the one that sets up Rain, but only regular Dreadnought gets it, while Gmax Dreadnought gets Stone Surge. So that's the same kind of problem that Charizard had, is it wishes it could set up its own Sun. I didn't explain what weathers do, but Rain boosts the power of water attacks and electric attacks. Sun boosts the power of fire attacks and lowers the damage of water attacks. So these weather bonuses are very useful, especially when you have a Pokemon that can benefit from them, like Dreadnought or Charizard or something like that. So Dreadnought is very good, especially if you're running a Rain team. It sets up Stealth Rocks for free while doing damage, which is just a great option for your team. However, if they have a Water Absorber, which is something that cannot be hit by water attacks, you don't really have much option. You have Max Lightning from, I don't know what move that becomes, probably Thunderfang or something like that. But that's very interesting. I didn't realize you got that. Let's see. Let me check out, because that is something to note. So if they send out a water type, unfortunately, you don't get grass coverage. So I don't see an electric attack. So I would say you don't really have an option to fight water ground types, specifically water ground completely wall you. It says you get max lightning, but I couldn't see for what. I probably was going too fast, but you should check that out. You can't deal with water types or ground types as Dreadnought. I mean, just a pure ground type you can hit with water, but if it's a water ground type, you're going to have a hard time, especially Seismitoad, which gets water absorb, other things like that. So you want to deal with those threats before you send out Dreadnought and start sweeping, because if they can just tank all 3 of your hits as a Gmax, you're wasting your Gmax. So you can not Gmax and maybe just throw out an attack, see what happens if they switch into it or something, and then save it for later. Next up, Duraludon. Uh, Very interesting Pokemon. It is a Steel Dragon, two very important types to draft. I would say Dragon less so, but it's still solid, one of the better types in the game. Only base 70 HP, but it has base 115 defense and 120 special attack, which means that it's going to be hitting you very hard. So its Gmax move is underwhelming, unfortunately, which is Gmax Depletion. It lowers the PP of the last move used, so every move has a certain amount of uses. For example, if I scroll up and look at a random move, let's see, Slash. Slash gets 20 PP, so um, it can only be used 20 times. When you use Gmax Depletion, it's going to reduce it by like 3 to 5 PP, so they don't get to use Slash as many times, which is nice. But it's not going to benefit you very much in the long run unless you're stalling out something. And to be honest, you don't have time for that in a draft league. You need to kill things as fast as possible, or play your team defensively well enough to tank hits and switch out correctly on things, and then hit them back really hard. So, unfortunately, Team Exploitation is not great. It's a dragon move, which means a fairy can just switch in and tank it. But you also have Steel Stab, which raises your defense. And honestly, I can't argue it. I mean, base 85 is solid, but HP is lacking. Definitely a decent Gmax to pick. Probably not one of the best, but it's still very good. And yeah, I can't knock it at all. You could get some good use out of this Pokemon for sure. Next up is Gmax Eevee. I really don't know what to say about this. It is an Eevee. Its highest stat is base 65, which means it is absolute garbage. It is adorable, but I see almost no circumstance in which you would run this, especially because its Gmax move, Gmax Cuddle, infatuates opponents, and you could only infatuate Pokemon of the opposite gender. So you can set all your Pokemon to females and hope that they defaulted to males, like a lot of people do for whatever reason. But Showdown, if you don't specifically pick a gender, will randomize that gender. So even then, you're only going to be able to hit 3, maybe, other Pokemon with Infatuation. And Infatuation's not that great in the first place, especially on a Pokemon that can't do any damage. So don't pick Eevee. You can, if you're really confident in your abilities and you think that you're going to destroy with your other Pokemon, your other 9 Pokemon, pick up Eevee for the lulz. It's funny. It's trash and cuddly, but not good competitively at all. So do not pick Eevee unless you're memeing. Flapple is next. It looks exactly the same as Appleton, except its HP and attack stat are swapped. Which means Flapple is very offensive in comparison to Appleton, who was defensive. It's got base 70 speed, so a lot better than Appleton, but still not great. I can't really justify using this because Gmax Tartness only reduces the evasiveness of the opponent's Pokemon, which is useful specifically for Flapple because the ability it gets is Hustle. The best ability it gets is Hustle, I should say, which increases the physical attacks that you use by 50%, but it lowers your accuracy to 80. So you're going to be missing on moves that you would not normally miss on while using Flapple. Note, Gmax moves do not miss, but when you're in regular Flapple form, if you lower an opponent's evasiveness a bunch, then your likelihood of hitting is much higher. It's that simple. That being said, I don't think this justifies being able to use it because while you'll increase your accuracy, they could just switch. And anything you're hitting with a Gmax move is going to be able to take your hits anyway. And with base 70 speed, you can't outspeed anything valuable, and it's just not worth it. Honestly, this is probably the least useful Gmax move that I have read so far, besides Eevee. So I would not recommend picking up Gmax Flapple. Regular Flapple could be decent. Its shiny is cool, because green apples are better anyway. But I cannot justify you picking this up over something else, unless there's literally nothing left. So let's move on to another trash Pokemon. Literally, Garbodor is a giant pile of trash. It has no stat over 100, so I don't know why this Pokemon's Gmax even exists. Its highest stat is attack at 95. It's got decent HP, and its Gmax move, poisons opponents. So this is absolute garbage. No pun intended, because poison is the worst status. All poison does is every turn you take 6% of your maximum health. If it toxic opponents, that would be way better. Toxic stacks damage each turn, so it's poison, but every turn it goes 6, then 12, and then 24, and then 36% of their maximum health until eventually they die. So they can't stall out if they're toxic. They will die eventually. Whereas poison, if they have leftovers or black sludge on, if they have leftovers on, uh, they just heal off the damage that they do, that poison deals each turn. So honestly, don't pick up this. It's a good Pokemon without the Gmax. I mean, it's decent without the Gmax, but I still would say everything else is better. So let's move on to Gengar. Gengar is really cool. Its shiny is awesome. It's a giant inflatable bouncy castle. It's got base 110 speed, 130 special attack, and it, unfortunately, like Charizard, it suffers from the fact that you want to run it offensively and not invest in HP, so you want to do full special attack, full speed. But it gets great coverage. Gmax Terror, similarly to Scorch, it stops you from escaping. So if you use your Gmax Terror on a Pokemon, it cannot switch from you unless it is a Ghost type, which cannot be trapped. But if it's a Ghost type and it takes Gmax Terror, it's dead. So I wouldn't worry about that. Or I don't know if it works on this. Haven't done much research into it. But flying types can also not be trapped by Arena Trap and Shadow Tag. So I'm not exactly sure if they are trapped or not. But even so, because Gengar is so frail and will die to a paper cut, the trapping ability is not very useful. Because you can't set up when you're Gmax. If you could set up a nasty plot while something is trapped on you, then it might be viable or useful. But everything is that's going to hit Gengar is going to kill it, unless it's Gmaxed. And it's just, I wish it was better. It's just not good. Gengar's only ability is Cursed Body. It used to get Levitate, and if it had Levitate, it would be super good, but they changed it to Cursed Body because it was too powerful and didn't make sense because he doesn't float. He's just standing there. So honestly, Gengar is good. It will hit you hard. You can set up a nasty plot before you Gmax. You are solid. Otherwise, I would not recommend it because its Gmax move is pretty not useful at all. So it's still a cool Pokemon, one of my favorites, but I cannot recommend using the Gmax over some of the other options. Like this one, Grimmsnarl, which is a super strong Pokemon. So just looking at its stats, base 95 HP is super good when you Gmax. Its attack is base 120, so it's going to hit really hard. Very slow speed, but everything else is decent. So, unfortunately, when you're Gmaxed, you can't benefit from its amazing ability Prankster, which increases the priority of non-attacking moves. So Thunder Wave, which paralyzes your opponent, will always go first unless your opponent also uses a priority move and is faster than you naturally, which is not hard because he's base 60 speed, but that's very rare. So it's really cool. Also, his Gmax move uses Yawn 50% of the time, which is super good. Yawn basically affects you one turn, and then after the next turn, that opponent's Pokemon that was yawned falls asleep. So you get sleep potentially on an opponent's Pokemon, which is probably the best status in the game. But it takes 2 turns to apply, and it's only a 50% chance once it's to affect them when you use Gmax Snooze. So that is a trouble. I feel like Grimmsnarl benefits a lot more from being regular Grimmsnarl. Something cool though is if you run the move Taunt, which is a dark attack, a dark status air quote move, because all it does, it prevents your opponent from using non-attacking moves. It turns into Gmax Snooze, so you can still do damage with it, even though it is not typically an attacking move once you're Gigantamaxed. So he's pretty cool. Grimmsnarl gets a lot. He gets coverage of like every type, basically every relevant type, I should say, except maybe water. It's super cool looking. It gets three or two great abilities. So if you're scared, you don't understand items, Frisk, if you send Grimsnarl out, it will tell you what that opponent's Pokemon's item is, which is very useful, as well as Prankster, which is just an ability that I think is unrivaled. Um, Unfortunately, as a Gmax, you won't be able to use Prankster that much. So if you Gmax, you lose out on your ability, but you still hit hard and you get Snooze, which is super solid. Overall, I think Grimmsnarl is definitely powerful. Definitely should be picked first, one of the first options. And yeah, that's just overall solid. So next up is Gmax Hatterene. Uh, it is one of the two fairy type Gmaxes, the other being Alchemy. So it is solid pick just because of that. Like I said, fairy is one of the best types in the game. And this one is psychic type, which is something that one of its weaknesses is weak to. So we can kill poison types with it. Um, However, it has base 29 speed. So it's very, very slow. You can see it has base 136 attack, which I think is higher than even Copperaj's attack stat, which was I think the highest we looked at so far. Um, and its Gmax move confuses opponents, which is another lesser status effect, which is like, I believe, 30% of the time the opponent will hit themselves after trying to attack, which is quite nice. Makes them hurt themselves instead of attacking you. But it has base 57 HP, which is not very great. And overall, it's more of a Pokemon, so it can take hits. If you can get a Trick Room off, which reverses speed priorities, which means since it's base 29 speed, it'll probably always go first in Trick Room, unlike, let's say, Cinderace with base 119 speed, which will then have to go second, except for priority moves. So Gmax Hatterene is very slow, but if you can make it work on a Trick Room, which if you're not experienced, I would not recommend, by the way. Otherwise, it's very bulky, and its Gmax move is very decent. So it's even though it doesn't benefit from the HP necessarily, it's still very strong, and I can't say that it would be a bad pick. So moving on to Inteleon, which is the water starter from this generation. He doesn't get big; he just starts flying on a geyser. So I don't know what that's about. But he has base 120 speed, which means he is super solid, very fast. Base 125 special attack makes him really strong. 70 HP is not bad. It's not great, but on a Pokemon like this, that typically is very frail with 65 in the defenses, it benefits greatly from Gigantamax, especially if you can get off a focus energy, because Inteleon's ability increases the damage of critical hits to 225%, which is one instead of 150. You give it a scope lens to increase its crit chance, and you use focus energy, which where's focus energy? Increases the crit chance to basically 100%. So if you can get Inteleon out on the Switch and use a focus energy and you G-Max, basically all your attacks are going to crit. And just like Cinderace, it cannot be blocked by abilities like Water Absorb or Storm Drain. They cannot absorb this attack. So even if a Pokemon comes out that is going to typically absorb the attack, they usually resist it or are neutral. But because of the crits, this Pokemon is going to do a lot of damage. So super solid Gmax, super solid offensive Gmax. I personally like bulkier Gmaxes, so I can invest in the HP and benefit from that doubling. But even then, Inteleon is not something that likes to take hits, so Gmax is probably going to let it live an extra hit or two, which is quite solid. Next up is Kingler. Um, 3 words. Don't pick Kingler. And let me tell you why. It is got a high attack and high defense, decent speed, not great, but its Gmax move is Gmax Foam Burst. It just harshly lowers speed. So while getting one of these off will let you hit the Pokemon that you hit with it again after that, because you'll probably be faster than it after that. You have to take a hit, which is not likely when you have base 55 HP and 50 special defense, but it's also a water attack, which can be easily blocked by a water absorber. He's also ugly, and he's not very bulky. So even if you can take one hit, get the speed drop, you're probably not going to do much more than that. And you only get 3 turns. So they can just switch out and get their speed back, or whatever. Like it's not that great. So I do not pick Kingler. I mean, you can. It's strong. It's got base 130 attack. You're not gonna get as much benefit out of it as other G Maxes though. So next up is a sleeper. I think one of the better G Maxes personally, and that is Lapras. It has base 130 HP, 130 HP, which means it gets up to like 560, 574 HP maximum when you're G maxed. It's it's got great moves. Its Gmax move sets up Aurora Veil. And what Aurora Veil does, it's typically it requires you to be in Hail, which is a weather effect to use. But Gmax Lapras just like, screw that. You don't need Hail. Here's your mitigated physical and special damage for 5 turns, which is great. And if you put an item on him called the Light Clay, you get 8 turns of taking half damage from everything, unless they defog or brick break or remove it somehow. But that is very uncommon. Um, I say it's uncommon, but if they're going against you with Gmax Lapras, they're probably going to bring some way to remove them. But even then, they're forced to use a move to remove the mitigation. And at base 130 HP, you're already super bulky, and you're going to take hits like a champ. And if they break it and they're faster than you, because Lapras is pretty slow, base 60 speed, you just use Gmax Resonance again after they break it and set it up again. And I guarantee you, whatever is using Brick Break or Defog to get rid of these screens is not going to want to take Gmax Resonance twice. So I think Lapras is solid. Definitely not one of the absolute tip-top best Gmax Pokemon, but it is not to be trifled with. It's super powerful. It sets up Aurora Veil, which is super great, especially if you have other Pokemon on your team that really want to benefit from not taking damage. Like I said before, Inteleon really likes to have that HP because it doesn't take damage. Or like last season, the person who drafted Lapras had Crawdaunt and Arctozolt, Pokemon that are slow but very hard hitters, so they don't want to take a. They like to get that mitigation. So if you got a bunch of Pokemon on your team that don't want to take damage or can't take that much damage because they are slow, uh, Aurora Veil is super helpful, and so I say Lapras is definitely up there in one of the top G Maxes, even though typically they're not that useful outside of G Max. Next up is Machamp, which you kind of saw at the beginning. Oh, why is this highlighted? That's weird. There we go. It is decent. It has base 90 HP, which is very solid, and 130 attack. So it's going to hit very hard. So what Gmax G-Strike does is it basically does what Focus Energy does, which increases your crit chance, but it's also an attack. Inteleon suffers from the fact that it has to use Focus Energy and wait a turn, doing no damage, in order to benefit from its ability Sniper. Machamp doesn't have that problem. So you can just Gmax G-Strike, get those crits, don't need to even run anything to increase your critting with, and you could just benefit from extra hits, because it is very bulky. It's 85 defense, special defense, and 80 defense. Means it's going to take a lot of hits. It is a fighting type, and it gets coverage that is very decent. So you can deal with a lot of the Pokemon you're weak to. You get Max Darkness for Ghost types. You get Steel Spike for Fairy types. You get a lot of stuff that can deal with the Pokemon he is typically weak to. So yeah, I think Machamp is solid. The problem it has is what 4 moves you're going to put on it, because there's a lot of coverage that you want to take, but it gets so many different moves that you only get to pick 4. So your best bet is to look at your opponent's team, figure out which moves are the most threatening, and take those 3 coverage moves in addition to your Gmax G-Strike to make the most of Machamp. So that's Machamp for you. Next up is Meowth. This is the long boy. He is utter garbage, even though he has the best cry in the game. 50 HP. Like Eevee, it suffers from having where this is regular Mouth, so it's even worse. Base 90 speed is its best stat, but everything else is pretty garbage. Second best stat is 45 attack. So basically what I'm saying is do not use Meowth. Its G-Max move is Gold Rush. It confuses opponents and earns extra money. The extra money part is irrelevant because you're using it on Showdown and not in-game. And the confusing, I don't recall happening 100% of the time. So I think it's like 50%, Gmax Snooze was on Grimmsnarl. It's super fast, so I mean you're willing to take it, but honestly, Meowth is not going to do anything for you besides look awesome and be a meme. So I would not recommend. Next up, Orbeetle. Orbeetle is very solid. Don't know why, but this ladybug has base 90 speed, which is in this generation a very high speed stat. 120 special defense is really strong, and 110 defense, which means he's going to be a very bulky Pokemon, but unfortunately only has base 60 HP. You can still make use of that because of its defensive stats super high. When you're Gmax, you'll be taking less damage no matter what, plus doubling that HP stat. Base 80 special attack is not bad either. Its move is Gmax Gravitas, which changes gravity for 5 turns, which means that Pokemon that are flying types or Pokemon that are levitating are pushed onto the ground, which means they can be hit by ground type attacks. Why is that useful for Orbeetle? It is not. It's not useful for Orbeetle at all. But if you have Pokemon that like to sweep with ground type attacks, like say your S tier is Doug Trio, it likes to be able to hit those earthquakes on everything. So for 5 turns, you can get that benefit. Or you can just pick Orbeetle because it's a very solid, bulky Pokemon. It gets Frisk, which allows you to see the opponent's held item, which is very nice. Otherwise, it gets Swarm, which just increases the power of Bug-type moves. Would not recommend because Bug-types are probably the worst offensive type in the game. But otherwise, it's very bulky. It gets Sticky Webs and stuff for when it's not G-maxed, making it somewhat solid. But as a G-max, I think it's pretty underwhelming. Next up is my boy Chonkachu. Look at this fat boy. Pikachu, of course, he's the mascot. They gotta give him a G-max. Base 90 speed like Meowth, except unlike Meowth, it's got base 55 attack instead of 45, which means it's better, but barely. So what it does is its G-max move paralyzes opponents, which is actually quite useful. But at base 35 HP, when it's G-max, it's basically going to be like a Pokemon with base 70 HP, but no offensive stats. So honestly, Chonkachu is not great. It's adorable, and it's chunky, but it's not useful. You can run it. I wouldn't recommend, but electric types are kind of hard to come by unless you drop to Rotom form or like Toxtricity. It's not going to be that great for you, so do not draft Pikachu. One of the 3 Pokemon I say do not draft. Rillaboom. That is the grass starter from this generation, and I think Rillaboom is absolutely going to be a threat this season because it just got a new ability. That ability is Grassy Surge. So for 5 turns, when this Pokemon enters battle, it sets up grassy terrain. Similarly to weather, grassy terrain gives you effects on the field. So it recovers 1/16 of its HP if it is a Pokemon on the ground. Grass type moves get a 30% bonus of attack if it's on the ground, and some other effects that aren't as necessary, but it also gets Grassy Glide, which gives it speed priority of 1 in ground, and it reduces the effects of ground type attacks. So that's just kind of a quick overview of what Grassy Terrain does. Rillaboom has base 85 speed, meaning it's not too slow. 125 attack is really solid, and base 100 HP means that he's going to get a lot of bonus HP when it G-maxes. On top of the residual HP he's going to be gaining each turn from grassy terrain. G-Max Drum Solo is just like the other 2, in which it cannot be stopped by an ability like Sap Sipper, which typically absorbs grass attacks. It does not care. It will hit you no matter what. So that's really good. When he's not G-Maxed, he can still benefit from his own ability because he gets Grassy Glide, which gives you a priority ground type attack, which means you'll go first attacking in grassy terrain. So that's super solid. I think Rillaboom is really strong. Don't know how his G-Max will fare, but I know regular Rillaboom will be really good. And we'll just have to see. And I think he's super solid. Definitely up there in one of the best G-Maxes for sure. Next up is Sandaconda. His Sandaconda is just not great. Its abilities are kind of cool. Sand Spit. If you hit this Pokemon with an attack, it sets up Sandstorm, which is useful if you have a team that benefits from Sandstorm, which would be typically Rock, Ground, and Steel types. Otherwise, it's not that great. It also has a 1 in 3 chance to remove status from itself at the end of each turn, 33% chance, or it increases its evasion in Sandstorm, which I think is probably the worst out of the 3 abilities. You'd probably run Shed because you don't want to be burned with its base 107 attack stat. You don't want that to be halved unnecessarily. Base 72 is decent, doubled, and in a Gigantamax form, but base 71 speed is just not great. It gets an interesting move in Sandblast, which is like Scorches, which traps you in fire, but this one traps you in sand. So it's a ground attack, traps you for 4 to 5 turns. Um, it can deal with flying types that would typically wall ground because it gets Rockfall as well. It gets Wormwind, which makes it really interesting because it can deal with dragon types, which are scary. It gets Airstream to boost its speed a little bit. It gets a lot of good coverage. It's a solid mon. Not great, in my opinion. I would pick something else before I would pick this, but it's definitely not bad. There could be worse options for sure. So you could pick it up if you need a good ground type because there are very few strong ground types in this generation. Next up is Snorlax, this fat boy, the better Chonkachu. Base 30 speed again is terrible, but base 160 HP. You thought base 130 HP on Lapras was a lot? 160 base HP. So his stats just become insane when he's Gigantamaxed. And his ability is Gmax Replenish. If you eat your berry, Gmax Replenish has a 50% chance to restore that berry to you. And it also gets the ability Gluttony, which means you will eat the berry if your HP falls below 50%. Typically, the berries that heal you only happen when you're under 33% HP. So it activates early and you can keep replenishing it. And because you have such high HP and decent special defense, like you're going to stay alive. You're going to be able to eat that berry and heal it a lot. The only problem is it is a normal attack. It does get walled by ghost types who don't get hit by normal attacks. So if you're fighting a ghost type, you're restricted to using max darkness. But he gets good coverage, so you can take coverage for basically every type in the game and deal with whatever your opponent has. So I think Snorlax's attack is definitely one of the strongest ones, especially if you can get the berry eaten. Its speed, honestly, on Snorlax doesn't matter just because of how much sheer bulk he has. It's just so good. So definitely solid. Normal types are typically pretty hard to pick because I don't think I've drafted one in the last 2 seasons, but they're definitely useful in their own way. So Snorlax is definitely a solid pick. Next up is Toxtricity. Toxtricity is interesting because it is a poison electric type, which means it is 4 times weak to ground, but it is a very good offensive Pokemon. Deals with a lot of those strong water types and fairy types. Only base 75 speed though, so it can be. It really likes the use of sticky webs or something on your team. But base 114 special attack, super good. As well as its ability, Punk Rock increases the damage of sound-based moves and reduces the damage of sound-based moves towards you. While its Gigantamax move either poisons or paralyzes. So unfortunately, it is poison, not toxic, so it is the worst status. But that 50% chance to paralyze is still really nice. Overall, I think Toxtricity is going to be a large threat. If you can avoid an earthquake, it's going to survive basically every attack. It deals with those scary fairies really well. Its ability gives it really good boost to sound-based moves like Boom Burst. Its special attack, which is called, I'm blanking out. What is it called? Overdrive, which is an electric attack. Sound-based move will be really strong. So I think Toxtricity is solid. I probably wouldn't pick it personally over some of the other options, like this next one, which I think is probably one of the biggest, most powerful ones. But it's still solid and can be used very well on the right team. Last but not least is Venusaur. which is honestly probably one of the best ones. Looking at its stats, it is pretty underwhelming, right? Like it's got 380s and only 100 special attack, 100 special defense. But the coverage this thing gets is just insane. It gets really great moves, and it gets the same ability that Blastoise and Charizard get. Deals damage to you for 4 turns if you're not grass type. And he's just really strong. Like, it gets Sleep Powder, Leech Seed, Knockoff, all these moves that are great supporting moves for when he's not G-maxed. It gets its ability is Chlorophyll, which means if you're in the sun, its speed is doubled, so its 80 speed is even better. So if you're using it on the right team, you don't even need to worry about investing in speed because it's Gigantamax, because it's bulky. Its speed is doubled in sun, so if you have a sun team, like, it's bulky and fast. You can't lose, and it's got one of the best attacks in the game. So I think Venusaur is really solid on the right team, specifically if you're running sun. Sorry, I kind of blanked out earlier about what I was talking about because this video has been like an hour long, but I think that it's definitely one of the best ones. All the starters that have Gmax forms, except Pikachu Eevee, are really solid picks. I would recommend them over pretty much everything else. Yeah, and if you're gonna run a good like weather team, you can't go wrong with Venusaur or even Charizard or something. So overall, that's all of the Gmax forms that you're going to be using. There's a couple that are unreleased that we're not using, like the Urshifu and Melmetal, which would be absolutely broken and banned. So I hope this helped you. I hope it taught you how to use Gmaxes, and I hope that my analysis gave you some idea of what to pick, or have an idea of what to pick, or give you 14 ideas of what to pick, because there's going to be 14 people picking. So I wish you luck, and I'm going to make another video on the S tier picks and explain to you why those are good, and I hope you draft a team that you like. Thanks for watching.